Yeah. So this will tie into like, how do we prioritize well-being? How do we, protect space for it? How do we practice curiosity in a way that allows us to identify individuals' needs, values, goals? And so, when we came up with these three helpful design principles, by no means are they, all of them. And some of them you might see as one or two. But these are design principles that we have come to find through either experiencing well-being as being part of a team, but also leading teams. And so we wanted to share those with you. And these, I think, will touch on that question around strategies for prioritization. Because I don't know, what we notice a lot with, even now with our clients, is when things get really busy, right? When the team starts to feel pressure, they start to return to maybe the behaviors that they were trying to change in the first place. And so a lot of the reasons why these new behaviors don't catch on is because it hasn't been ingrained as a new behavior. It hasn't been like operationalized, if you want to use the corporate term. It hasn't been culturified, meaning it's not a way of being for the team. It's not, like something they just naturally do, and therefore it gets deprioritized. So a lot of what we're going to talk about today is like, how do we start to develop these new behaviors that just become instinctual and part of the way we are as a team? Jeff and I, when we were chatting about this, it came down to three things. So leadership, and if you remember our definition of leadership, it's anyone who takes responsibility for themselves in the world, but also giving yourself and others the permission to practice self-care, wellness, and so forth. We have boundaries. We've learned, and this is where I struggled personally, because I didn't know my limits, the bend versus the breaking point. Those are very important to find out and understand about each person on your team. And then you can also find those out at the team level by creating some norms, right? And so we'll get into some of this, but these are setting expectations. And these expectations, once you're clear about them, you can communicate them when you're recruiting new team members, right? And then throughout the journey, the employee journey, if you will. And then finally, rituals and rhythms help to create, like the synapses that need to happen to kind of codify that into people's brains and behaviors so that it becomes a thing that they do. Because if we actually think back to my point about how we've seen teams deprioritize well-being when they're really stressed, it's actually, those are the moments where you need it the most, right? That's where you're going to build adaptive capacity, as a team and as individuals. Okay, so Jeff, maybe let's share a couple more examples within each of these. So leadership, what can you do right now the biggest thing when we say all roads lead to leadership and power is, if you're a leader, you need to model that behavior first and foremost. I can't tell you how many times we've done work with teams and employees will come back to us and say, yeah, that's great, but like, it's obviously not important because our leader's not doing it. Right? It's kind of, the leader that sends their team to all the learning and development seminars, but doesn't engage and participate themselves. So how do you prioritize this? You put the oxygen mask on yourself first, and you lead that way. Deep listening. When you create space to sit down and actually identify people's needs, values, and goals, that's a way that you're starting to culturify that. It's sending a message that we value these types of conversations, these relational conversations, in addition to the tactical or transactional ones. I won't dig too much into there, but I mean, the resources for success, depending on your team members' needs, values, and goals, those resources are going to be different. So it's not going to be a one size fits all. And that's something, when you're talking about prioritizing it, showing that you're open to different ways to support that. This is fairly new for us, this model or these design principles. So Jeff, anything to add there?
Well, it was actually, funny enough, Lisa just jumped on the call, and I worked with Lisa for about a dozen years. And so, hi, Lisa. I'm just going to just jump in to say hi. And this permission piece is really important. We hear this a lot, that, permission isn't granted verbally. Like, leaders can't just say, yeah, take your time off, or shut your phone off, or don't answer your emails on vacation, and then go and model a different behavior. Permission is actually granted by the behavior of the leader. And I learned that lesson very strongly. Probably about 2015, I took a leave of absence from work for an anxiety, episode of anxiety that kind of caught me out of the blue. And I was working in addiction and mental health, of all things. And so I should have seen it coming, didn't see it coming. And when I took that leave, I sent an email to the team and said, hey, this is actually what's going on. Like, I'm not just off, I'm off because of X, Y, and Z. And I got a flood of emails from my team saying, thank you. for taking this time off, because like what I'm doing is giving them permission to prioritize themselves as well. And I could have just said, hey guys, I'm off for a month, I'm taking some leave time or whatever, and it wouldn't have had the same impact. And so leaders, the modeling, this permission piece is actually, I think permission is given in how we model as much as what we say. Working with a client right now, there's a tension there. Leaders are saying one thing and then modeling something else. And that's hard for people to navigate, especially when it comes to well-being, which is often seen as optional to begin with. And then we kind of make it even more optional by not modeling it. So that's what I would add to there.
Yeah, and I know sometimes some people really value, like, tell me some tools or strategies I can use. So I'll throw one in that's worked really well for us. If you're familiar with the online collaboration and synthesis tools, Mural or Miro, they actually have some really great canvases or worksheets that you can take your team through. One of them they have is new ways of working. And so what this does is it really helps you to identify people's needs, values, and goals, and the support and how that they need in order to function at their best, right? And well-being is a crucial component of that. And by understanding that, you can design a harmonious experience where they're getting those needs and value and goals met through the way that you work. So it is also going to, you might operate within a larger organization where, I've heard, oh, we can't do that. This is the standard of the protocol or the process for the organization. So as a leader, sometimes you might actually have to challenge that for the benefit of your team, and vocalize these limits and boundaries and norms that you've set up for you to be successful. And again, we can go deep on that too over a coffee. Let's jump to boundaries. So these are really about understanding self-care strategies that really allow you to live a life of well-being. It's about one thing that, for example, I was terrible about was like my radar on when things were, at a level that I could actually create change so I wouldn't hit my limit and burn out, stress out, right? Because when I'm at these levels past my limit, it spills over and I'm impatient with my children. I'm not there for them, fully focused, all my other relationships suffer. So, really being clear about your self-care strategies and awareness tools, but doing that as a team as well is as important. We find, Jeff, you mentioned this earlier, shared language, articulation, when we say the same word, does it have the same meaning for us? We find a lot of teams usually are like two gears working between individuals, but they're missing each other because they're not understanding each other's needs, values, and goals. And so really clear and conscious communication as a skill to develop with your team will actually help you to get at the things that you should be prioritizing. And then I can't remember, Lisa, we might have even talked about this, these culture contracts where, they can be fun and they can be really short, but they really speak to the norms, the do's and don'ts, what's okay and not okay on this team. And you can get even granular when it comes to like maybe well-being is a core value of yours or a principle that you really want to focus on. And it really helps, especially as you have people coming in and out of the organization, to latch on to those behaviors that support this or maybe challenge or go against it. And so we've got examples of all types of these templates and tools you can use as well. And then the last one is rituals. And for me, this was the most important. I still struggle with this, but for me, like from the moment I wake up and then those last couple hours before I go to bed, if I can design, like I've designed a ritual that if I stick to, oh my gosh, it's a game changer for how I show up in every day. So in the organization, when you think about your team, it's like one way to prioritize or show that you prioritize well-being is to actually build those into your natural rhythms. So one way is, if you haven't done this already, is to get a baseline on what well-being looks like on your team. It could be a survey, as lean as a survey, or it could be a little higher fidelity with surveys, one-on-one interviews. We call it ethnographic observation, but just kind of watching people and how they work. How many breaks do they take? What do they do to decompress? What are they doing on the weekends, right? To understand those behaviors, then you can start to add those in as you're designing your team experiences. Feedback loops. We find that a lot of teams, well, first of all, meetings is a whole other issue, but we find a lot of teams have these meetings that really don't drive value because they're either really one directional or super tactical. And so people are forgetting to focus on the relational aspects of those meetings. And so we would say, we've got health here, but it could be well-being where you're maybe you've got a scorecard and you're checking in with everybody around the table. how would you score your physical well-being right now, 1 to 10? Oh, tell us why, right? And you could go around that. That's, I've seen teams. Actually, Jeff, you and I met in a peer group doing something like that, right? And then obviously what we don't see enough of is professional and personal development. You know, we see these like 1 day a year conferences that people get sent to that really focuses on, you know, some skill set that never gets enacted. But we rarely see personal development support. You know, someone that might be struggling, like an example would be like a professional coach, right? To help someone unlock their potential. Anyways, Jeff, I'm babbling. Anything to add to these?
No, I think that's great. I think that, you know, these three domains, I think one of the biggest struggles that I know I had as a leader, and I see the leaders that we work with struggling with is, you know, it's not that I don't care about well-being. I care very deeply about my people. It's that I don't know what's mine and what's theirs. I don't know, like I can't make them go to yoga. I can't make them stop smoking. I can't make them eat healthy. So then we kind of throw our hands up in the air and we say, well, your well-being is yours. And we really focus on well-being at the I level. But these design principles obviously acknowledge that well-being is interconnected with a lot of other things, our cultural expectations, our communication patterns, our rhythms. And that is something we can absolutely control as leaders and as organizations. We can design the container or the environment that people exist within much more intentionally to support the level of well-being that we want to drive. And, you know, an example, you know, I worked at addictions treatment program, and for years, probably decades, the standard shift was 4 days on, 4 days off, 4 days on, 4 days off, 16 hours a day. So you'd work just like a ton of work, and nobody had questioned, you know, could we actually go down to like a 3 or a 3.5 day and give people one extra night at home? That's, you know, a very simple change, along with some other things, dramatically improved people's experiences of the work. And that was well within the control of the leadership team and the program to design for. So, you know, the design principles, I think, is the right language here, because these are, you know, things that we can use to create the container, create the experience that people are having with us. So yeah, these are great. Thanks.
Yeah, I'll give you some tactical things I've seen organizations do that work well. If you're familiar with Adam Grant's work, he talks about this, you know, finding a state of flow or being in a state of languish. And so some organizations that I know we even enacted this ourselves, was like a no meeting day, for example, no meetings on Wednesday, which allows us to get into a state of flow and creativity and not be bothered by, you know, the noise that otherwise is there. And for some people, if that's about you focusing on your well-being on that day, and that's what's going to, you know, bring you into peak performance and health, great, do that. You know, for others, you know, they've said, man, I have trauma around Sunday nights, knowing that Monday is going to be hard. I take Mondays off. Now, that doesn't mean I don't work on Mondays, but that means I control whatever I do on that day. And typically I do some of my best work on that day. So this is where there's like being open to new ways of working, and knowing that like those no meeting Wednesdays, for example, might not work for some people, like Jeff and I. So Jeff and I still meet on Wednesdays, but we don't do that openly and publicly for others, because we realize we're leaders in a position of power, right? So anyways, I think there's a level of, you know, it's one size fits one.